WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington, Indiana, where Hoagie Carmichael, Booker T. Jones, and John Mellencamp impacted the city and helped it become a music destination. Bloomington is home to a variety of musical artists, live music venues, and hundreds of annual music events. More information at musicbloomington.com.
WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Indy Softwater, performing service and repairs on over 30 brands of water systems, plus iron and well filtration systems for residential and commercial properties. Includes water tests conducted on-site, providing real-time information about the water quality. The softest, cleanest water begins with Indy Softwater. More at indysoftwater.com.
We're going to take a trip right now. Like we always do about this time.
This is a journey into sound. Break it down.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. On this week's show, I'll speak with the acclaimed Fort Wayne, Indiana-based musician, composer, arranger, and producer, Nitish Kulkarni. His latest album, Indigo, blends traditional Indian music with contemporary electronic sounds.
I stopped thinking about Western music as Western and Indian music as Indian, and I really just started thinking of everything as just music.
Nitish Kulkarni began his musical journey as a tabla player, later expanding to keyboards in production. Nitish released his debut album, Synesthetic, in 2015. Since then, he's issued a steady stream of recordings, including the 2018 album Listen and his latest project, Indigo. In addition to his solo work, Nitish has also performed alongside legendary artists like Ustad, Amjad Ali Khan, and Shridhar Phadke. Nitish Kulkarni will join me in a moment. But first, let's hear the opening track from Indigo. This is Alap. That was Nitish Kulkarni with Alap off his latest album, Indigo. And Nitish is my guest this week. Let's join our conversation. Nitish, thank you so much for taking time to join me today. I'm a huge, huge fan of your music. We're going to hear some tracks from your new album, Indigo. But first, I wanted to learn a bit about your background. From what I understand, you grew up in Texas and you started playing tabla as a child. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. Thanks, Kyle. So I often joke that I'm an Indian born in Canada on July 4th, and the story goes downhill from there. All true things. I actually, my parents had immigrated to Canada in the mid 80s, late 80s, I guess, and I was born in the early 90s. And when we immigrated to the United States, we actually first moved to West Virginia. So I actually grew up in West Virginia when I was a little kid, and then I spent most of my grade school, all my high school years in Houston, Texas. So yes, definitely a Texan, and now I live in Indiana. And so, so it was really when we moved to Texas and there was a larger Indian community that I was able to start formally learning tabla at the age of 10, which is actually quite late, by Indian kind of classical music standards. But so that's where I started learning. My father had purchased a tabla set for me when I was really young, like a 4-year-old, but there was nobody around in this kind of small town in West Virginia where we lived, and so not much of an Indian community to speak of. And so it wasn't until we moved into a more major metro area like Houston where I actually started learning formally. So yeah.
It seems like you took to the instrument pretty quickly once you had a chance to get some lessons. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, you were sort of considered a prodigy at a young age, and you were playing with adult musicians as a teenager. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I started performing more or less full time when I wasn't in school, around the time I was 13 or maybe 14. And yeah, in the Indian music scene, particularly the music scene in my ethno-linguistic group in Houston. So we are speakers of a language called Marathi. So I was quite active in the Marathi community, also played a little bit in the Gujarati and Hindi and maybe Bengali communities, but predominantly in the Marathi community, I was quite active all through my high school years, performed with all of the musicians that were there. And most people in my parents' generation, immigrated to this country. And so they had a day job, so to speak, and but were quite talented singers and musicians. And so, on the weekends, whenever we would have gigs around town, whether those were for Indian festivals or private concerts, house shows, that sort of thing, that's kind of the environment that I grew up in, playing tabla predominantly. And at the same time that I was doing all of that outside of my academic studies at school, I was also quite active in symphonic band, marching band. I marched clarinet, actually. And so had a brief stint in percussion in high school. And so I was kind of living this dual life, one foot in Western music, one foot in Indian music, and was quite lucky to have kind of the best of both worlds that way.
Since you brought it up on that point, there's something I read about you that I wanted to ask about. It was really fascinating to me. Your reputation as a tabla player came to the attention of the band director at your high school, and you were included as a tabla soloist in the marching band's drumline. Is that right?
You're making me feel famous, like you've dug up all this interesting information. Yeah, actually, that is quite true. I don't know whereabouts you found that, but yeah, when I was in 10th grade, we got a new assistant band director at my high school, and he was our percussion director, and he was listening to me play some etude or something like that on clarinet, and we were just getting to know each other. And that's when I told him that I played tabla, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, you've got to bring your set in sometime. Got to hear you." And so we arranged for it. I had my tablas dropped off by my parents at school one day after rehearsal, and I played a little bit for him, and he said, "We've got to figure out a way to get you into our indoor marching percussion ensemble." And so I would kind of, in the fall season, I was on clarinet marching outside, and then in the spring semester, I was doing indoor drumline as part of the pit percussion, but I would take my tabla in, and so that was kind of, I regard that time in my life as a very formative period, not just because, it's a formative period of time for everybody, high school and so on, but specifically for me musically, because I think the germ as an arranger kind of was sown there, because when I showed up with these Indian classical drums and because I was a clarinet player, I knew staff notation, and I had even started composing kind of as a hobby on the side. But that was such a tremendous education in arrangement, because there were no tabla parts written, and I just had to listen to what the pit percussion ensemble was playing, what's the mallet percussion playing, what is the timpani playing, what's this keyboard playing, and then also what is the battery percussion who's marching behind me playing, and kind of figure out my own part, and so every rehearsal I was more or less just improvising until by competition time, my parts got a little bit more solidified, and then I would play the same thing.
Fusion.
What was the response the band would get when you were out performing? And it must have been pretty unique, right?
It was such, it was so magical in a way, because I was already quite passionate about the marching arts, and the clarinet just happened to be the vehicle for it. I was never intended to make clarinet performance a goal or anything like that, but to take that and then this passion that I had outside school for Indian music, meld them both together was just such a magical thing. And I remember one particular incident. We were at a drumline competition, and the percussion director from a competing high school came and found me after we had done done performing. We had rolled back out. Everybody was packing up their instruments, and he comes and he finds me and he says, "I just want to shake your hand. Like, you're the tabla player that everybody's talking about at this contest." And it was just such a surreal experience. And I was probably 15, 16 years old. I was not very old. And it was a really cool moment for me personally, but it was also, I think, the germination of what has kind of come to be my philosophy, being a bicultural citizen of this country, that your identity is something to be celebrated, and if you are just kind of authentically who you are, people will be attracted to that, and they'll find the beauty in your own culture, especially expressing through something that is so universal like music. It was quite instrumental music, that too was quite it developed quite organically. But yeah, it was an amazing experience.
You've devoted so much of your life to music and music technology. You mentioned you started your formal studies of the tabla at 10 years old. Did you know at that age that you wanted to sort of dedicate your time and your life to music?
I don't think I knew at 10 that I wanted to devote my life to music. I think music was always there. I mean, in my lineage, Indian classical music is very strongly prominent. So my mother's father, so my great-grandfather on my maternal side, was in his time widely regarded as one of the preeminent musicologists in India. His name was Pandit Veera Arthole. He was kind of, he was a radio producer on All India Radio, which was the predominant vehicle for
the NPR of India.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and this is like way back in several decades ago, long before my mother was born. But he was also in his academic life responsible for creating many schools of music. He was kind of the person in the industry that people would come and refer to when they were thinking through curriculum design and how do you structure a classical education program for Indian arts and that sort of thing. But because of that, I think somewhere in my DNA, it's there. I grew up in an environment where music was always on. My mother sings as a hobbyist. My dad, actually, I think his ear for music is even better than my mother's. But neither one of them are musicians. They didn't really grow up playing instruments or even taking vocal lessons or anything like that. And so it wasn't something that was imparted to me as you must be a musician, or it just kind of found me, I guess. That's not really the right thing to say, because it was never apart from me. It was always there. Growing up, music was always playing in the background. There's home videos of me even as a year and a half old kid, kind of dragging out whatever pots and pans and playing on them as if I was a tabla player. And so even my pastime as a baby was just pretending I was a musician, and now I just keep doing the same thing with maybe a little bit better equipment.
Let's take a break from my conversation with Nitish Kulkarni and listen to a track from his latest album, Indigo. This is Night Eyes. I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. We just heard Night Eyes off the album Indigo by the Fort Wayne, Indiana musician Nitish Kulkarni. And Nitish is my guest this week. He first arrived in Indiana as a student at Indiana University. Let's return to our conversation as Nitish discusses his time in Bloomington. Tell me about your experiences in Bloomington and what you were studying.
It's interesting. I only applied to two colleges as a senior in high school. One was UT Austin, which was in state, and then one was IU Bloomington. And I don't know what had drawn me to Bloomington. I didn't. I probably met somebody from Jacobs School of Music at a college recruitment fair or something like that in high school. But I had never even been to Indiana. We didn't know anybody here. It wasn't like I had any other ties to the state. And now that my career is here, it's kind of interesting. I ended up here as a full-time Hoosier, but I think it was the primary motivation for me was I was looking for a college that had a strong combination of music and business. My idea actually had been to go to college as a business student, learn all the skills that I would need to know to run my own business someday. Or at the time, actually, the dream was that I would open up my own studio and sell my own marching band arrangements. I was already composing and arranging for marching bands. That was kind of what I thought I would end up spending my life in. And so I went to school with that intent. And somewhere around probably my third semester, which is actually just so happens to be when I started writing some of the earliest demos for some of the songs that have now ended up on Indigo. I started realizing I'm not getting enough time for music. And that had always kind of been my threshold for when I would make a life change, whether it was, relationships or academic paths or whatever. And so I'm like, well, I'm not getting enough time for music. And that's kind of where I draw the line. And so I started exploring some other options. I had enough credits in the business school by then where it did make sense to still kind of finish out my undergrad career getting a minor from the prestigious Kelley School of Business. And so I still wanted to do that. But I actually ended up creating my own major at IU through the individualized major program. I called it organology, which is the study of musical instruments. And basically the rest of my second year and then all of my third and fourth years at IU Bloomington, I took courses in the music school. I took courses in acoustics and even the psychology of sound. So it was just this multidisciplinary kind of study path forged to get me exposed to anything and everything related to studying, listening to, understanding instruments, composing with them, orchestration, combining them in different ways that would still respect the laws of acoustics. And it was kind of the start of a music production curriculum that I ended up doing later at Berkeley.
After you left IU, you went to Berkeley College of Music. You eventually come back to Indiana, to Fort Wayne, Indiana. I believe you've been in Fort Wayne now for almost a decade. Was it purely coincidental that you came back to Indiana, or is there something drawing you to the state of Indiana?
It's probably written on my palm somewhere, I guess. But no, it was complete coincidence. In fact, while I was at IU, I ended up purchasing my first piece of equipment from Sweetwater Sound, which is based in Fort Wayne, and had no idea that it was based in Indiana at the time. I actually placed my order for that piece of gear while I was still in Bloomington, but by the time it was delivered, I was back home for the summer. So it actually ended up getting shipped to Texas. And I really never had made the connection that here's this gigantic company in the music industry that's based like 3 hours north of where I went to school. And even my graduate studies at Berkeley, most of the master's programs, I should say, at Berkeley are offered at the international campus in Valencia, Spain. So I was actually across the pond in Spain for about a year. And then I come back stateside and I'm looking for jobs. And I had known Sweetwater, of course, because I'd purchased equipment there. And it had been an amazing research aid while I was at Berkeley. Whenever we would look up pieces of equipment and so on, Sweetwater was the de facto place to find all the technical specs and all that stuff. When I came back home and I had started looking for jobs, of course, I was on Berkeley's, a job classifieds or job bulletin board. And I think some folks had who I now know quite well, but from Sweetwater, they had done a recruiting trip or something like that to the Boston campus, and so a bunch of Sweetwater jobs had been posted on our internal bulletin, and I saw that, and I said, "Oh, how about that?" And it's back in Indiana, so at least I know the area, and well, let's just give it a shot. And next thing you know, a month or two later, I was being flown out for an on-campus interview. I ended up getting hired at the start of 2017 as a sales engineer, and then and I've been here now for almost 8.5 years. So
I'm curious if Fort Wayne has been a good place for you to be based as a musician, as a composer. I know a lot of your compositions, they're recorded long distance. You're working with people all over the world. But has Fort Wayne been a good place for you as an artist, as a musician?
It has been more so probably even than Fort Wayne. Just being the Sweetwater community has been amazing because I'm surrounded by musicians, which was really the main thing that I missed when I moved back to Texas after my time at Berkeley. When I was looking for jobs, the two things that were really my only two criteria. One was I got to be in a place where I'm surrounded by a community of musicians. And the other thing that was important to me was that I got to be at a place where I can keep learning. I don't want my skills to atrophy, so to speak. I want to stay at the cutting edge of the industry. And I found both of those things at Sweetwater, and it ended up working out really well for me to take that job, move out here. And so to that end, it has been a wonderful time for my development as a musician, getting access to amazing equipment, amazing thought leaders in our industry, and then it's also allowed me to kind of, Fort Wayne's kind of my HQ. I travel a lot for various shows and that sort of thing. And so whenever I'm at home here in Fort Wayne, it's a nice quiet place where you can kind of think as a creative and be creative. And then when I collaborate with people, whether it's doing whether I'm being a sound engineer on a tour or whether I'm doing a travel recording project, which I've done a couple of those, life on the road's quite hectic, but then you come back to Fort Wayne and things are nice and quiet, and it's a very cozy town. It's got all the amenities of a big city without any of the traffic that I grew up with in Houston, and it's got all the charm of a small town vibe, but without the lack of access to things that you would want out of a big city. So it's turned out to be a really nice place, and I've since gotten married. My wife has moved out here, so we've kind of set up roots here, and we love Sweetwater, and so we're in it for the long haul, I think.
Let's take a break from my conversation with Nitish Kulkarni and listen to another track from his new album, Indigo. This is Let Me Show You. Cultural Manifesto will return with more words and music from Nitish Kulkarni after this short break.
WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Indie Softwater, installing water softeners and reverse osmosis systems for homeowners and businesses in central Indiana for over 25 years. The softest, cleanest water begins with Indie Softwater. More at indiesoftwater.com.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. My guest this week is the acclaimed Fort Wayne, Indiana-based musician, composer, arranger, and producer, Nitish Kulkarni. Earlier this year, Nitish released his latest album, Indigo. Like many of the projects Nitish has released, Indigo features a cast of high-profile collaborators, performing music that mixes acoustic and electronic sounds and blends Eastern and Western cultural influences. I asked Nitish about his approach to creating music and how he describes his sound.
From a compositional perspective, I think over the years, I stopped thinking about Western music as Western and Indian music as Indian, and I really just started thinking of everything as just music. And once those things started blurring into one kind of art form for me, it was a lot easier to access melodies that I didn't necessarily intend to write in a particular raga, but of course they end up sounding like a raga or something like that. And so I guess to answer your question, how do I think about music? I mean, I think for me, my connection to my cultural roots is very important. And so whether or not I'm trying to make an Indian album or Indian sounding album, any music that I write is going to be inherently Indian. You know, the way Indian music approaches ornamentation or approaches construction of melodies and kind of free-form improvisation within a given framework and that sort of thing. Like, I think all of those ways of thinking end up coming into my music, whether or not I realize it. And so for me, what I was most interested in as a much younger composer was in mixing sounds that had not traditionally been heard together. And I think part of that comes from that time in my marching band years where I was playing tabla with this drum line, and that combination of sounds was so intriguing to me, and I'd never heard it before. And at some point as a composer, I think you realize, like, you've got to just write the music that you want to hear. Nobody else is going to write it for you, you know? And so I think that's how it started coming out. Like, some of my earliest compositions had influences of marching band arrangements and marching percussion arrangements and Indian music, but then, you know, some of the kind of the contemporary instrumental stuff that I was listening to, and it had all these various influences, Bollywood influences, that sort of thing. And I don't think early on when I was starting to create that style of music that I was necessarily thinking like, oh, I need to make some sort of statement here, and because my name is what it is, I've got to put a tabla in here and I've got to put a sitar in here. And it was just whatever the song needed, I tried to use that sound, and it was really sound that drew me in first, and the expressive nature that it has, or the emotion that it can invoke. And even that, I think, is a very Indian in nature. Indian music is quite meditative in nature. It's very spiritual in nature, even if the lyrical content isn't spiritual. But there's this kind of underlying theme in all of Indian art, I feel, that has to do with connection with the divine. And so that was, I think, always there in my music because that's what I grew up with. And I think the other thing that was a strong motivator, or I think what I think about before anything else when I sit down to write is what I see in my own music. So my first album was called Synesthetic. It's because I have synesthesia, so I see colors when I listen to music, and I also have auditory tactile synesthesia. So when I'm mixing records, for example, different instruments feel like different textures on my fingertips. And so, you know, when I was a young mix engineer, the way I kind of made sense of things in my head was, cello sounds too much like denim and not enough like silk, and you know, those mix notes would have made no sense to anybody else. But over the years, especially my time at Berkeley, I ended up learning, okay, well, here's what that means. You got to add a little bit of saturation here, or you got to, you know, give it a high shelf EQ boost, or douse the vocal a little bit more reverb, or whatever the case might be. But I ended up learning what effects and what processing was making me experience what I was experiencing in terms of cross-wiring of the senses. So that theme is, I think, there somewhere in my music always, whether it's an album that's named after a color or whatever. But different ragas come to me as different colors. That's actually how, when I was much younger, like when I was first starting off playing tabla, before I had any dexterity on keyboards, this is actually how I would memorize ragas. Like, I would listen to a song and I would go look it up in some reference book, like, okay, this composition is in this rag. Okay, well, I saw light blue for this song, and so next time I see the same color, I'll know that it's probably in this rag. And that's kind of how I started deconstructing Indian music at a theoretical level. And over the years, then, you know, I have notebooks that are full of, okay, this rag, you see this color, and so, or this chord progression makes you see this color. So if you want to create a painting, so to speak, that is in this color, you need to, you know, use these notes. And actually the track that is named Indigo came from me asking the question, you know, purple is my favorite color, so it came from asking the question, can you imagine a color and write a piece of music that will make you see that color? And that's what I did with Indigo. So it was kind of this backwards the way of reverse constructing the synesthetic experience. But I would say those are the main themes throughout my music.
Let's take a break from my conversation with Nitish Kulkarni and listen to another track off his latest album, Indigo. This is Painting the Canvas. I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. We just heard Nitish Kulkarni with Painting the Canvas off his latest album, Indigo. And Nitish is my guest this week. Let's return to our conversation. Nitish, as we wrap up, I'm curious what the future holds for you. It seems like you've been slowly building up your music bigger and bigger. The arrangements and the collaborations are getting bigger and more interesting. What does the future hold for you? Would you have any projects coming up that you'd want to share? Any long-term ambitions you want to share?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. I do have some projects that I've been thinking about. I've been quite busy touring the last few months, and so now I'm home for the summer, and for most of the fall we should be here. And so this is a time to be very creative and think about future projects. And I do have a few in mind. I think my next album, if Indigo is kind of my sonic experience, in a nutshell of what it's like to be an Indian growing up in America, then I think the next album is going to be a real tribute to my motherland. So it'll be, if anything, even more Indian and a more exploration of Indian sounds. I'd also like to explore different Indian languages. So I've recorded predominantly in my mother tongue, which is Marathi, worked with Marathi singers, and done a few projects in Hindi as well. But India is such a unique place because it's a land of many languages. And so there's so much beauty in all these different regional languages that we have. And most of the music that I listen to is Indian, but it's not just from my part of India, or not just in my mother tongue, I should say. And so I love listening to music from all these different parts of the country, and I'd like to collaborate with more artists that are not just from my part of India, but from all around North India, East India, South India, feature them on the next record and have it be kind of a pan-Indian effort. I think would be is kind of the dream project. And so we're starting to work on that as of just the last few weeks, and I don't know how long it'll take, but very excited to see it come to life.
That's exciting. I look forward to hearing that. I wanted to end with a piece you put out last year, a single. This is a very ambitious collaboration with the Budapest Art Orchestra. I believe this is your arrangement of an old Marathi film song voiced by Asha Bhosle. Tell us about this piece. It's gotten a lot of attention online. I think it has over 200,000 views on YouTube. It's an amazing arrangement of this piece. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you. This is Ekatsaya Janmizarnu is the name of the song. Very popular Marathi film song, as you correctly alluded to, sung by Asha Bhosle. And I grew up with this song. It was one of many, many songs that I probably played in all sorts of concerts and that sort of thing growing up. And so I've always had an affinity for this song, primarily because I think from an arrangement perspective, it was way ahead of its time, many, many decades ahead of its time. In fact, if you go and listen to the original recording, you kind of get the sense that there's a string ensemble playing behind Ashaji's vocals. But owing to the music technology at the time, it's not, obviously recorded in high fidelity or anything like that. And so anytime I hear that piece, I just think like, wow, what a progressive piece. Like the background string arrangement is actually quite Western in nature. And at a time where, I mean, strings had started appearing in Bollywood music and other regional film music in India, but that was kind of a standout piece just in terms of its scope and how harmonically rich it is. And I'd always wondered, like, what would it sound like if it were recorded with today's recording technology? Like, it would be so amazing to hear this orchestra. And at some point, a couple years ago, I thought, well, what's stopping you from just doing that? And so I had a very good friend of mine, Enrique Ponce, who I went to Berklee College of Music with. Enrique and I have collaborated on a number of projects over the years, and he had recorded with some of these orchestras in Europe. And so I reached out to him and I said, listen, I've got this kind of idea. It's a little harebrained, but I want to do a transcontinental collaboration. I want to collaborate with people in India, people in Europe, and people in North America, and do one recording, one music video. And so would you help me out with that? And would you also be the orchestrator for the project? And he was more than happy to lend his talent. And he did such a great job of kind of taking what I had just recorded as a bunch of MIDI tracks and kind of really fleshing it out into an arrangement with proper sheet music and so on. I mean, I haven't written sheet music like that for orchestras in a long time, but I also knew that I would be so busy trying to coordinate schedules with the singers and instrumentalists in India and so on. I was also having a new verse of lyrics written by a friend of mine, Samir, who lives in Canada. And so I was going to be kind of busy coordinating some other logistics for the project. And so I said, well, why don't you take care of the orchestral arrangement? I'll send you all my thoughts, and we just need to orchestrate it. And so he did that very beautifully. I got these lyrics written as a kind of a secondary verse. And so the background to the song is basically, it's sung from a young woman's perspective, and she's kind of imagining what her life might be. And it is all, the original song it's two verses, and both from the female perspective. And I thought, well, what if we reimagine this as a duet? And what if whoever whoever her Prince Charming is that she's singing to in her mind's eye, what if he could actually respond to her, and what would he maybe say about their life together? And so my friend Samir wrote very beautiful lyrics in the original style, but they are fresh lyrics from the male perspective. And my good friend Shreyas, who actually makes a surprise appearance on Indigo as well, but I had my friend Shreyas sing that verse, and then we had a very talented young female singer in India, Shridhar, sing the original female part, and we kind of created this collaboration. So she was there in India, Shreyas was here, I was in Fort Wayne, my friend Samir was in Canada. We were collaborating with Budapest. Enrique, who was orchestrating the string section for me, lives in El Paso, Texas. And so it was just this amazing coming together of many artists from around the globe. And then to add the kind of the finishing touches, I had the great pleasure and honor of working with one of India's foremost, if not the foremost, bass guitarist right now. His name is Nitish Kulkarni, no relation of mine by blood, but same last name. And Manish Dada was just fantastic. So the final product is what you hear, is a mix of all of those different elements. So at its core, I guess you could say it started off as a cover, but then it ended up kind of turning into a half cover, half original, inspired by this recording from so many decades ago, long before I was born, but then reimagined with a European orchestra. So it was a great pleasure to work on that.
Congrats on the success of that piece too. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Nitish, I can't thank you enough for taking time to speak with me today. I think you're writing an important chapter in the history of Indiana music. I don't know if you think of yourself as an Indiana musician, but in my eyes, you're writing an important new chapter in the history of Indiana music, and I just can't thank you enough. I love your work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to it and taking the time to reach out and coordinating. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much for listening.
That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you to my guest, Nitish Kulkarni. WFYI is powered by listeners like you. If you appreciate all the news and music you hear on this station, please consider making a donation now at WFYI.org/give. Check out the Cultural Manifesto podcast at WFYI.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Cultural Manifesto is produced and hosted by me, Kyle Long. Thank you for listening.
WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington, Indiana, where Hoagie Carmichael, Booker T. Jones, and John Mellencamp impacted the city and helped it become a music destination. Bloomington is home to a variety of musical artists, live music venues, and hundreds of annual music events. More information at musicbloomington.com.